Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. So we have folks tuning in right now. So welcome everyone and hello. And we're so glad you're here for today's Critical Path to Women Leading in Science webinar. And we're ready to get started. Today, we are 5 women leaders here at the Critical Path Institute, or C-Path, who are going to share with us a little bit about their backgrounds and their personal professional development journeys, as well as highlights about the C-Path programs that they lead. And through this, we're going to see that each personal and professional journey is very different, which demonstrates what's true for all of us. There's no single prescribed path to success. And that's what makes it so exciting, right? So we have reserved plenty of time for questions after our speakers, so we hope you'll be able to stay with us for the duration of the program. Before we begin, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We have muted participant lines to keep background noise to a minimum, but if you have any questions for our speakers, and we hope you do, please just post them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're going to get to as many of those questions as possible once our presentations have concluded. We are recording today's event and we'll make it available online in the coming days. So without further delay, let's get started. Leading us off today is C-Path's President and Chief Operating Officer, Kristen Swingle. Take it away, Kristen.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Can I get a thumbs up that you can hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you, Michelle. If we could just move to the next slide. Excited to be here today. I'd like to actually kick off the webinar by acknowledging that this Saturday, February 11th, is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And so, this is an opportunity to promote full and equal access to and participation in science for women and girls, and really contribute, celebrate the contributions of women in science. And that's why my colleagues and I are so excited to be presenting to you this week. This year, Nora Magiro is being featured for her recent work during the pandemic, in which she designed solar-powered chill boxes, which would allow vaccines to remain cold while being transported to the remote areas of Kenya. And then we have, 2 legends in Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Hodgkin, both of them pioneers. Katherine Johnson was actually a mathematician who worked on NASA's early space missions, while Dorothy Hodgkin won a Nobel Prize for her use of X-ray to evaluate the structure of biochemicals. And so my colleagues and I are honored, to have the opportunity to share with you just our respective journeys, as Michelle mentioned, as women in science, and how we kind of all ended up at Critical Path Institute. And for each of us, not everything has gone as planned. And you'll hear that in my story in just a second, but, hopefully there are aspects of what we share today that resonates with each of you. For me, my journey actually starts in Tucson. I'm a rare native, and because I was a native when I reached the ripe old age of 18, I decided that I wanted to leave Tucson to experience something different. And so went to Northern Arizona University for my undergraduate research, and I actually started with a focus on marine biology, and then realized that maybe since I have a death fear of the ocean, that wasn't the best career choice for me. But in the process, actually fell in love with microbiology. And so, I really decided that was an area that I wanted to pursue postgraduate. Prior to leaving to go to Texas A&M for graduate school, I got married to my high school sweetheart. And 2 days after our wedding, we moved to College Station, Texas, so that I could start my graduate program in the College of Medicine at Texas A&M. I actually started in a PhD program. I passed my qualifying exams when I was about 6 months pregnant. Ultimately, after living and dying by the 2-week life cycle of a spirochete, I decided that I wanted to leave graduate school with my master's. This was shortly after having my first child, our son, and decided that it was time for us to get back closer to home. We were a little bit tired of being 12 hours away from a mountain. And so we moved back to Phoenix so that I could start an R&D job at an environmental lab. And really, part of the reason that I was qualified for that role was because of the molecular tests that I conducted while I was in graduate school. And so one of the primary accomplishments that I had while I was at this environmental lab was to use molecular tests that had been created by the EPA to test environmental samples for mold and fungi. After about 3 years there, I actually ended up managing their microbiology lab. And shortly before that, I gave birth to my daughter. And about a year into that, we decided that we wanted to move back to Tucson to be closer to family. I then transitioned to working at Cord Blood Registry, where I started as a supervisor. And what I really transitioned into an R&D role to validate an automated processing method for processing stem cells. And again, I was, I had the experience for my R&D work at the environmental lab, as well as my graduate school experience. So all of these different aspects of, what I had done up to that point really helped prepare me then for taking on this R&D role within CBR. And that whole process took a couple of years to complete that overall validation. And at that time, leadership at that point asked me if I would like to transition into directing our laboratory operations, which of course I jumped at that chance. And I quickly transitioned into my VP role there. So during my tenure at CBR, at various times in my career there, I had oversight responsibility for manufacturing, quality, regulatory. At one point I had commercial responsibilities, so consumer sales and client services. And I worked directly with every function in the company, including scientific affairs, marketing, and field sales. While I was at Cord Blood Registry, our organization joined Arizona Bioindustry Association, so AZ-Bio. I joined as our board representative in 2015, and I've served as chair of the AZ-Bio board since 2018. So all of this brings me to C-Path. It just happened to be the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. I have always had a need to be intrinsically connected with the mission of any organization that I'm a part of. And I just have such a profound respect for C-Path and what had been built up to the point in which I joined. And it was really also an opportunity for me to further my career and my skill set. Most recently, we are empty nesters officially. So those 2 children that were born in, College Station, Texas, and in Phoenix are now both at the University of Arizona. And that really brings us to today. So next slide. So what is Critical Path Institute, and how did we come to be? So the Critical Path Initiative was an FDA effort that started with a white paper published in 2004. And that was really a call to action to transform drug development process through collaboration. The Critical Path Institute is in essence the application of the Critical Path Initiative. So we were incorporated in 2005 to assist the FDA through a memorandum of understanding with FDA. Next slide. 17 years later, while most of our team is based here in Tucson, we do have team members throughout the United States, Dublin and Amsterdam. On this slide are pictures of our leaders over the years. We operate with a shared mission to serve as a catalyst for innovation that accelerates the path to a healthier world. So really, how do we do that? Next slide. Well, we do that by serving as a neutral convener, getting external stakeholders in therapeutic area and therapeutic development ecosystem to collaborate. We build solutions to problems, and we facilitate research where there is an unmet need. And with our deep knowledge of regulatory science, we serve as an expert educator to our stakeholders and to students. Next slide. So we operate as a trusted third party, and C-Path really facilitates public-private partnerships, convening stakeholders from industry, academia, and the government to share data and expertise and identify and address challenges with getting safe and effective therapies to patients in need. Next slide. At C-Path, we leverage our core competencies in biomarkers, clinical outcome assessments, data management and standards, modeling and analytics, and regulatory science across our 6 concentration areas to create drug development tools and solutions in areas of unmet need. So throughout the rest of this webinar, you'll hear from several of my colleagues across a variety of disciplines here at C-Path. You'll hear from Dr. Hong Nguyen, Director of Regulatory Science. You'll hear from Dr. Diane Stevenson, who's the Executive Director for the Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium. Dr. Ramona Walls, who's our Executive Director for Data Science, and Dr. Micah Everetts, our Executive Director for the Translational Therapeutics Accelerator. Next slide. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to Hong Nguyen.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. My name is Hong Nguyen. I am Director of Regulatory Science. My history, let's go to the next slide, starts initially with my interest in radiology. Then I realized that going through radiology, I needed to go through medical school and working on human cadavers. So I decided, no, that's not what I wanted to do. And so that led me into a summer of investigating what I wanted to do. So I ended up with deciding to go through a PhD program because I wanted to teach at a university level. And at that time, one of the main requirements is to have a PhD education. So I went through a PhD in pharmacology at a small Seventh-day Adventist university in Loma Linda. And that enabled me to be in a small graduate program. And I had more direct contacts with each of the professors, and especially my thesis committee. So that helped pave my way in terms of dedicating my training and career into science. And in addition to teaching at a university level requiring a PhD, many require postdoctoral training. So I decided to move down to San Diego, La Jolla area to do my postdoctoral training. And I ended up in a laboratory working on T-cell signal transduction. Not my favorite, but I love the research working with the microscope. So that's where I landed for 3 years on an NIH funded grant. Through my time as a postdoc, I decided that I needed to know the landscape of job opportunities and to figure out who may be able to help me along the way. So as uncomfortable as it may seem, I got into networking, and through the Association of Women in Science, I began to volunteer to help out so that I start with a small group of new strangers to meet them and then slowly work my way through to being comfortable of speaking to strangers who then became friends. The same thing happened with the National Postdoc Association. Through a research colleague at the University of California, San Diego, he introduced me to NPA, got me heavily involved. I was there as committee member, committee chair, and then I moved to volunteer on the board as well. So that began my path in leadership, opportunities, training, learning along the way, and again, networking with the National Postdoc Association. I was beginning to meet with deans and high-level administrators in universities, as well as organizations and societies that support the postdoc endeavor. And through that, after my postdoc training ended, again, by networking, a fellow postdoc told me that there was opportunity at the same institution that they wanted to start a postdoc office and graduate training program. So the PI knew that I was interested, and we had a very informal chat, but he was all in to start this postdoctoral training program. So I transitioned out of the lab into an administrative role to start the postdoc office. And that's where I was for about 6 years. And along the way, I collaborated with other nearby institutions to form the San Diego Postdoc Training Consortium, where we host multi-day training, one for academia track, one for industry track every other year. So that helped me develop some project management skills that I have kept along the way. And so then going back to networking again, a fellow student in the same graduate lab that I was in was working at the FDA, and he contacted me saying that the FDA, his group, was expanding and if I was interested. At that time, I'm like, why not? I wanted something different. I wanted to get back more into the science and the research. And so the work that I did at FDA was a blend of both. So in 2010, I uprooted from the West Coast and moved over to Maryland for my job at the FDA. It was a very interesting drive across the country. So if you haven't done it, I would encourage you to take that on and pick an interesting route, because my husband and I ended up going through several national parks in Utah, and it was beautiful. So once I landed at FDA, it was a learning curve. It's not something that you can learn outside of the FDA. You can learn about the process of what the FDA does and the requirements in terms of submitting documents to the FDA, but how the FDA does what it does is really on the job training. Come in, I spend 2 weeks getting on board. I have a mentor who helped me through the process and navigate and beginning to understand the guidances and how to interpret federal guidances and regulations. Took me about two solid years to feel that I can somewhat be independent in reviewing a submission. So, you know, and to this day, even if I've been there 10 years, I was still learning something new with every submission that came across my desk. In 2012, the FDA, my group, changed location. We moved to the main campus, and where we used to be, it was 2 buildings, 4 floors, so two floors each. So it was a tight-knit community. But when we moved to the main campus at White Oak in Silver Spring, we were divided into 7 floors. So that was really hard on some people for managing relationships. So I volunteered on the Workplace Enhancement Committee to help develop engagement events, social hours, happy hours, picnic barbecues, things like that, to help people stay engaged with one another, even though they may be in 2-3 different buildings or across the campus, things like that. And along the way, in addition to what I did as an FDA pharmacology reviewer, I also heard about the Women of Cedar. This is a networking initiative that Dr. Janet Woodcock wanted to have to help engage women at Cedar develop leadership skills as part of the succession and retention plan within Cedar. So I volunteered for Women of Cedar, became a committee member, stepped up as a committee chair, and then I ended up as chair of the group as well. And that's where I introduced the leadership circle, hoping that similar to a book club, we would watch certain videos on YouTube or TED Talks, 20 minutes or so, have the group watch it, and then come together for discussion in terms of how certain messages in those videos and TED Talks resonate with them, what they have identified that they can learn more from, where they can have self-assessment to see what more they need to develop. And then we together as a group in the leadership circle share our stories as a way to help others learn. And as I also wanted to increase my reach in networking, I volunteered for the FDA Alumni Association. That's a group where it helps us be mentored by those who have left the agency to help us understand what potential jobs and careers they can have once you leave the agency, but also as they can serve as a neutral individual to hear about challenges, about team dynamics, how we navigate certain areas within FDA, because they've been there and they know what it's like, and the stress of not having an appropriations bill passed by Congress, in a timely manner. So those times could be very stressful because you don't know if you're going to still be paid, when you can get back into the office. So working out those little stressors with former FDA employees can have that commonality and that shared product. And so by then I wanted to get closer to clinical and the patients. So that led me to Critical Path Institute, where my job now is to help different programs and consortia navigate the regulatory pathways to then submit documentations or solutions and programs that can help develop drug products for rare diseases. And while I'm here on the professional level, I do also volunteer for RAPS, the Regulatory Professional Society, DIA, the Drug Information Association. SDRAN and OCRA are the San Diego Regulatory Affairs Network and the Orange County Regulatory Affairs Network over in California, because those are the two that are closest to me here in Tucson and the ones that I'm familiar with. So I volunteer with them to pick up some additional professional development. All right, let's go to the next slide. This may be a little busy, but I just wanted to point out through the 4 different positions that I have had, there are certain commonalities in terms of skills to have, and then what skills I picked up where. So across the board is relationship building. Everywhere you go, there's going to be relationship building. And how do you develop that? Me, I practice through my volunteer efforts at the different organizations that I have highlighted. But you'll also see too, there are time management skills that you can pick up, and then writing skills across the board. And so these are the things that you can pick up, where I have picked up in my volunteer positions. I haven't done budgetary, but I was a volunteer as treasurer for the NPA. So I was familiar with the spreadsheets and how things are reported to higher ups. I don't want to spend too much on this slide, but the main point was to show you that there are skills that you can take with you and develop across the board as you move up in your careers. Right, next slide. The next slide goes into what we actually do in regulatory science at Critical Path Institute. And these 7 wheels, the spokes of the wheel, is just an example of what we do. The main part of regulatory science and what I do is regulatory intelligence. That's where I either attend conferences or read published articles or published news to see what is going on and what is developing from the regulator's perspective, from FDA, from EMA, and other regulators. So then I bring that information back into C-Path and share with our groups to see how we can strategize and navigate to be more successful. Part of what we also do in regulatory science is serve as a peer review for reviewing regulatory submissions, just to have that quality check and the consistency to represent C-Path when we're submitting something to the regulators. We also do have a collaboration with the University of Arizona through the regulatory science certificate programs. And sorry, I didn't put a link in here, but you can find more information about that on the UA website as well. So there are other things that we do that may not fall into any particular program at C-Path. So oversight of contract projects and other regulatory projects, regulatory science will take that on to manage that program, that conversation, and make sure that the work and the task is completed on time. So in a nutshell, that's been my pathway, and this is where I've landed, because every position from postdoc to science administrator to FDA reviewer and now to director of regulatory science, it has been a combination of teaching, which I had wanted to get into PhD to begin with, working with the patient level on some level, whether I'm reviewing the data in a submission or helping them understand the regulatory pathways so that they can help our consortium move forward. So teaching in a different way, not on a whiteboard or in a classroom, but I'm still able to influence in that manner. So that's been my path along the way. So now I'll hand it over to Diane.
Hello, everyone. It's a joy to be participating in this event and really rewarding to hear from my colleagues because we have so much in common, right? And I want to share with you, just to start off with my journey to C-Path. I'm one of the old timers. I've been here 11 years already, but you'll see in this diagram that, you know, my journey started when I was a child, and the top is some very special photos to me that highlight more my professional journey. The blue shows the organizations that I've worked with since I've been a neuroscientist now for 40 years. And then the bottom are the people in my family who've unfortunately been impacted by the diseases that I've worked on. But in a nutshell, I've spent most of my career in large pharmaceutical companies trying to get much needed therapies to people suffering from brain disorders. And it's a very exciting time now, but despite the fact that I worked in the lab for more than 30 years, doing drug discovery, doing the hard work of identifying promising new targets, testing those in animals. I love microscopy, tremendously rewarding career working with brilliant people from around the world, despite the fact that more than 45 therapeutic targets I've worked on over the years in 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies. None of those therapies made it to patients. But my journey and passion is really driven by the journey that I've seen in my family. When I was little, I wanted to be a cheerleader. So today, that's what I say that I do most effectively is cheerlead, to get everyone to work and collaborate together and share data. But when I was young, I watched my aunt pass away from multiple sclerosis. I have family members with autism. I lost my mother to Alzheimer's disease. And more recently, my brother passed away this past year, suffering from young onset Parkinson's. So each of these stories and people, special people that in my life, drives me in ways that's hard to explain. But my 2 favorite things about coming to Critical Path Institute is making a difference, working with brilliant people like Hong and Kristen, and you'll hear more today from others, but mostly partnering with people that live with the diseases that we work with, because it's them that are the true experts of their disease. And we're in a completely new world called patient-focused drug development, where we all work together with patients and the regulators as partners to drive change and get these much needed therapies to approval faster and more efficient and less costly than it's been in the past. So I'll tell you a little bit about the consortium that I lead now, which is called Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium. Incredibly exciting project. Next slide. It's a project that we started several years after I came to Critical Path Institute, because I previously led a big consortium that tried to pull together Alzheimer's and Parkinson's under one umbrella. And we realized that if we keep trying to pull these 2 big disease areas together, we weren't going to make enough progress. So it was a nonprofit in London called Parkinson's UK that really took the lead to provide us a lot of funding to kick this initiative off the ground, with a vision that what would it be like if we could bring all the data together from around the world of both natural history, observational studies, as well as clinical trials, most of which those trials had failed, how could we use that information to help us understand this disease in a much more effective way? This just lists all the stakeholders we work with. We have industry, but what's incredible is we have many different nonprofit organizations from around the world, all partnering together, including people living with Parkinson's. We have 30 different scientific advisors. We work with the NIH, but really importantly, we have FDA and EMA, the regulatory agencies, are actually part of our teams, and they give us advice and they help us as key leaders of the field. This is an incredible project. We've brought together a lot of data over the past 7 years since we launched, and it's not just to build the database and try to understand this disease. It's probably not one disease, just like cancer many years ago was thought one disease. There's probably multiple different subtypes of Parkinson's, and we're deciphering that with data. We've brought forward this data to regulators to have imaging biomarkers used to help pick the right patients for the right trials. And the most exciting project now, just to give you a snapshot, is how we can use remote technologies and smartphones and digital technologies to help bring these technologies to the patients in their lives, and help how these technologies can get the treatments to patients faster and more efficiently. So I'll just show you a graphic that I think is a really great way to think about this space. This is a data effort that we started from around the world. We started several years ago with around 5,000 patients. Now we've tripled that, and we're bringing in even more data. But the next slide. The data we had brought forward until recently was on traditional outcome measures that are assessed when people go to the clinic. And now we're in a new world, right? Post-COVID, where we can use data collected from smartphones. So if you go to the next slide, it's just a brief animation. If you click on the first bullet, so in people living with Parkinson's experience this disease every day differently, and even every hour of each day differently. So how can that be captured? This is a really nice graphic that shows, if you try to look at how severe each person lives with Parkinson's, it's incredibly heterogeneous. So how do we capture that? Well, if you think about a clinical trial, you can only pick maybe 1 or 2 visits, maybe twice a year that they go in. And the blue dot would be, hey, if you're going to go in a clinical trial and you're only going to get assessed every 3 to 6 months, how are we going to capture all those variable assessments? And that's where the true promise of technologies, in that you can have this incredible power to be able to measure people in their daily lives with things that we all use, like our Apple Watch and smartphone devices. And this is where the incredible enthusiasm is for how this is going to reshape our thinking of Parkinson's. When does it start, and what are the most promising treatments? So I think this is the vision, right? So where are we today? We're in a very exciting time with many therapies in the pipeline for Parkinson's disease. This is a really exciting time. We have all the stakeholders at the table. We're trying to bring in more and more, especially of the technology companies, into the consortium, thanks to advice from the regulators. But we have a long ways to go, because to get from where we are to where we need to be, we need to work more closely with people living with the disease. We need to share data and collaborate around the world with consensus standards, so that years down the road, we're going to all be riding together through this journey. So happy to share this story with you, and I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Ramona. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Diane. Great to be here. I am the Executive Director of Data Science at the C-Path Institute. And I'm going to give you a little story about how I got to be here. Could you go back just a second? since many of you are probably too young to have grown up with the talking heads like me, I've put a link to this video here. And next, please. Let's get away from this before people go crazy. I'll just say that when I was in my late teens, the song "Once in a Lifetime" was one of my favorites, and I've often felt throughout my life that it's kind of a fitting theme song, especially when I look at where I am now, because my path was anything but a straight line. So just to walk you through some of the pieces some of the highlights of both personal and professional that I went through. I started out when I was 17. I went to Carnegie Mellon University as a physics major. I switched during my second semester, I switched to chemistry. And then during my third semester, I switched to professional writing. And then I often joke that my father is I'm one of the only people I know whose parents suggested that they drop out of college because my dad said, maybe you should take some time off and figure out what you want to do. So after 2 years of college, I dropped out and I decided that what I wanted to do was become a fashion designer. Very different from someone who had spent their whole life thinking that they were going to study science and get a degree in sciences. But back in those days, I will be honest, being a woman in science was a lot harder. And I felt pretty ostracized, and many of my friends were in creative professions. So I thought, well, let me try a creative profession for a while. So I moved to New York City. I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology, which sounds like a made up place, but is actually one of the top universities for studying fashion design, and got an associate degree in apparel design. I worked for many years as a designer and associate designer in New York City. I started working when I was 20 years old in sample rooms. And by the time I was 23, I was an assistant designer and a designer in several companies. And so I got some really good experience very on in leadership, running a sample room, supervising people, having to make decisions. And I think that surprisingly has paid off over the years, even though I'm no longer doing that job. When I was 27 years old, my husband and I at the time decided we wanted to live in Europe. So we moved to Amsterdam. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a work visa. I did have a residence visa and a permission to run my own business there. So I worked there as a fashion designer, consulting for different companies for about 3 years. And it was really another really great experience, not only creatively, but also to understand business, how to run my own business as a freelancer. And then I got pregnant. That happens a lot. I was married and I got pregnant, but then I got divorced. Right after when my daughter was about 6 months old, my husband developed schizophrenia. So I was there in Amsterdam with a young baby, struggling to get by without an official work visa. And I decided probably I should, do something a little bit easier in life rather than struggling so much. So I was very fortunate to be able to go and live in Germany with my family. At that time, my father had taken a job in Germany in order to be closer to his growing family. And so I was able to go live with my parents for 3 years and raise my daughter, continue to do freelance fashion design, including working with some friends back in New York, trying to set up our own business. And I really enjoyed that, but I realized that, at that time, being a fashion, this was before the days of remote work, of course. And so I realized that if I wanted to continue working as a fashion designer, I was going to have to move back to a big city. It's going to have to be New York or Amsterdam or Paris. And I thought, as a single parent with a young child, I didn't want to do that. I wasn't ready to go back to New York. So I thought, what do I want to do with my life? And I had learned that I really loved gardening. That's something I always did, even when I lived in New York City with little boxes on my windowsill. And I said, let me go back to school and study biology. I'll get a degree in horticulture and I'll become a professional gardener. So I moved back to the United States with my parents, also moved back. And then I enrolled in the Pennsylvania State University. I was originally starting as a major in horticulture. But I talked to some friends there and I met various people about what I wanted to do. And I said, what I'm really interested in is in studying the interactions between plants and their environment. And a friend of mine who was the mother of one of my daughter's best friends said, well, that's called ecology. That's what I do. And I learned what ecology was. And so I ended up studying environmental resource management because I was already halfway down the path to horticulture in the College of Agriculture. And switching to the College of Science would have cost me a lot of extra time and I would have lost some of my funding. So I decided I ended up getting a degree in environmental resource management with a minor in horticulture. And I will say that I was the valedictorian of my class at Penn State while being a single parent. And so it is possible to do things that you didn't think you could do in life. And it was a really wonderful opportunity for me. All through that time, I knew that I loved science. I knew that I wanted to work with plants, but I didn't want to be a professor. It seemed too academic, literally, right? So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had started doing research as an undergraduate and I discovered that I love doing research. So I decided to go to graduate school. I thought, well, somebody will pay me to do this. Great. I'm going to go be a researcher. And I got into the program at the University of Pittsburgh, where I met my current husband. I met him and started dating him the day that he got a job offer at a different university, at Stony Brook University in New York. And so we dated for about 6 months, we got engaged, and then I ended up transferring to Stony Brook University, where I finished up my PhD in ecology and evolution. Now, my PhD is not in drug development or pharmacology or anything that any of the other folks on this call. It was in plant evolutionary ecophysiology. So I studied wild yams in Mexico. I traveled all over Mexico with my daughter, collecting plants and bringing them back and doing experiments on them. And it was a great opportunity. But then when my daughter was about 16 years old, I was finished and I needed a job. I needed a postdoc, as Hong mentioned, that's the thing you do in academics. So I needed one that was relatively close by, again, before the days of remote work. So I found a postdoc at the New York Botanical Garden. Now, I'd gone back to school to study horticulture. So of course, the Botanical Garden was a dream job for me. I was thrilled to be able to work there. I had to commute from Stony Brook into the Bronx, which was a long drive, but it was a really wonderful opportunity. But ironically, what I was doing there had a lot to do with plants, but it wasn't plant sciences at all. It was data science. I was building something called the plant ontology, which is ontologies are a kind of code that let computers understand data, and reason over them. So I realized while I was doing that I really enjoyed doing data science much more than doing field biology. I love being in the field, but data science and sort of basically science that supports the work of other scientists, right? So building resources that other scientists could use was something that I found much more immediately gratifying and really rewarding. So a few years later, when my husband got a job at the University of Arizona, I came out here and needed to find a job. And I was lucky enough to find an organization, which at the time was called iPlant and is now called Cyverse, which is a very large infrastructure organization. It was the largest grant ever funded by the NSF, the National Science Foundation Biodirectorate, over 100 million years, over $100 million over 10 years to build data science infrastructure for biologists. That was a job that suited me very well. And it also allowed me to grow, as a data scientist, but then as a manager and as a leader. And I started writing my own grants, getting my own independent research there. At which point I switched to becoming a Bio5 research faculty member. So as a research professor, what does that mean? It means that you write grants, you get money to do them, you hire people to do the work, and you manage everything yourself, and you don't have a salary, right? So I was writing the grants to pay my own salary, to pay my team's salary, to pay overhead to the University of Arizona. It meant that I got really wonderful experience in leadership, in budget, in project management, in planning, as well as the scientific experience that I was doing there. And I really enjoyed that. But it's a very high pressure job. And, constantly, okay, where's the next grant coming from? How are you going to support all these people on your team and keep this going? And at some point I realized that I needed to, sort of switch directions to something where I could focus a little bit more on the work and a little bit less on the fundraising aspects of it as well. In between, while I was doing that, I also started selling art. So I have had creative parts of my life throughout my whole life, and I paint. And I was lucky enough to, win a few awards through the University of Arizona faculty staff art shows. And I started selling art to friends, and I'm working on putting up a website now. That's something I do in my spare time. I don't have a ton of spare time because now, of course, I am at the Critical Path Institute. When I left Bio5, I just happened to hear about the position here for a data scientist through a friend. She said, "Do you know anyone who'd be interested in this?" And I said, "Yep, that sounds like me. Sounds perfect for me." They were looking for someone to new ontologies, the new data science. And C-Path ended up being a really wonderful opportunity for me, not only to do, even though it's a focus on human health instead of plants and the environment, the work I did was very similar, but I've grown a lot. In the 2 years that I've been here, I've gone from being a data scientist to a team lead, to the associate director, and now the executive director. And all of the skills that I've learned along this crazy path seem to actually fit very perfectly. It feels to me right now that I'm in the perfect position for where my history led me, even though I never would have predicted this is where I would end up. So next slide, please. So what do we do what do I do as the executive director of data science? Well, I'm part of the Data Collaboration Center. That's our department within C-Path. And as you can see from this graph, which has a number of subjects on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, we are getting more and more data. The amount of data that we're getting is growing exponentially. And so therefore, the more traditional methods that we've used for managing data over the past 10 years or so are no longer sufficient. They're still important. We're not abandoning what we've done, but we're adding new methods all the time. Next slide, please. So in order to keep pace with all of that data, I lead a data science team. We're currently up to 9 people. And our mission is to provide the tools, methods, and people needed to maximize the impact of C-Path data. So we are a team of data scientists, data engineers, and data analysts. And most of what we do is create different workflows for different data science tasks that focus on improving the management of data. So we're different than a lot of data science teams. We use all of the traditional data science techniques, but rather than using those techniques to discover or to answer scientific questions, we're using them to improve the way that data are managed within C-Path, and also we hope within the broader community. And this picture is just, that picture is just a workflow of one of our, the workflow for one of our largest projects, the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics Platform, that shows you all of the different kinds of pieces that we have to work with within the data science team. Thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the things that we do as data science teams won't surprise anybody. We work a lot on standardization and integration. That's sort of the unspoken backbone of all data science, because if you can't bring data sets together, if large data sets from different sources together, you can't do many of the other kinds of analyses. We work with tools like R and Python. We build ontologies. We use different standards, including CDISC and the OMOP Common Data Model. That's what maintained by the group called Odyssey. We build ontologies and knowledge graphs. We do machine learning and natural language processing, and we use data analytics and build tools like our Shiny applications. Next slide, please. So that's what my team overall does, but what do I do as part of those team? I actually do very little hands-on data science myself these days. Instead, I spend my time on leadership tasks. I do a lot of strategic planning, so thinking about what's important for our team, what are the priorities over the next year, where do we want to be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years. Personnel management is really crucial. Again, I have a team of 9 people, so that means I'm managing. I have 8 direct reports right now. I'm hoping that I've just hired a new associate director, hoping that some of them will start reporting to her. But those personnel skills and how to manage their time and make sure that they're happy and doing the best job that they can is something that's a really, really important part of my job. I spend time thinking about system architecture. So we're building these large and complex data workflows. How should they work? What would be the best path? What are the requirements for those? So use case and requirement gathering is something that's really crucial in my job. I do a lot of writing. I started writing when I was in high school, like many of you probably did, and it's proved to be one of the most important skills that I have as a professional, and no matter what job I have. Well, it was probably less important as a fashion designer, I confess, but it's still important there. So I write proposals, I write papers, I write plans, I write reports, just write emails, writing almost every day. And then I do a lot of communication. I do outreach like this talk. I do inreach, so helping the other teams within C-Path understand what our team does and allowing me to understand what they do. So communication skills are also really crucial. So hopefully, looking at that history and looking at these skills, you can kind of get a sense of how all these different experiences that I've had over my life, even though they seem to not necessarily make a sensible path in the end, have brought me this set of skills that allow me to do my job, and I hope do it very well. So with that, next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Micah Everts. Thanks, Micah.
Thank you, Ramona. I am so glad to be here. I do have the most interesting colleagues, I think. I'm a fairly new addition to the Critical Path Institute. I started in April last year, but I'm very happy to be a part of this event and kind of share some of my path to C-Path. And I also wanted to highlight, as I walk through this, what the motivators were for making changes during my development. So I'm from the Netherlands, born and bred there. I went to the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, that nobody can pronounce except if you're Dutch. But my topic was pharmacokinetics and drug delivery. So I did a PhD there and I graduated in 2002. And what I felt was missing in my PhD was really molecular biology. I thought, okay, to be a real scientist, I need to know how to clone something. And through connections, and Han kind of talked to the networking part as well, through connections, I was able to get a postdoc at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, or UAB, in the Gene Therapy Center, where I learned how to clone something. I worked on adenoviruses that were used for a lot of applications in gene therapy, from cancer research to lung biology, and really learned how to manipulate these viruses on a molecular level. I was then somebody tried to recruit me in an institute in California, which makes you feel really amazing. But I thought, okay, California, it's going to be really expensive to live there. Maybe I can ask within the university, within UAB, if there's opportunities to grow here locally. And luckily they said yes. They asked me to join the faculty, and I could remain in an area with a quite lower cost of living than the beaches in California. So joined as an instructor, went through the ranks, became an assistant professor, and my focus area there was to combine gene therapy with nanotechnology. So nanotechnology in the shape of gold nanoparticles, magnetic nanoparticles, quantum dots for imaging, making multifunctional systems. It was really cool to conceptualize, to talk about at parties, but the day-to-day, I was getting a little bit bored, I guess, because, you know, science, you're in it for the long haul and you need to go very deep. So I also realized I'm pretty good at this, but compared to some of my peers, I'm not great. It was just a self-reflection time, like, okay, how can I make the best contribution to the scientific community? So I started talking to a lot of people within UAB. I think I spoke with 20 people in a span of a couple of weeks, just to see like, hey, what else can I do within the university that still utilizes my skill sets? Also, at that point in time, I did not have a green card yet, so I was a little bit limited to staying in the university setting just because of visa issues. But through those conversations, I was invited to become a leader of the Alabama Drug Discovery Alliance. So that was a newly set up program at the time between UAB and another nonprofit in Birmingham called Southern Research. And it was really to utilize the basic science that was happening within UAB, marry that with the drug discovery and development expertise within Southern Research, and together form a really nice pipeline support program. So started doing that and really had a blast setting up this program, talking with the professors at the university about their research and seeing, hey, can we do maybe high throughput screen around this? Let's do some medicinal chemistry to optimize molecules and really move it forward throughout the pipeline. Well, then university-wide, you start to get a little bit known. Somebody said, hey, we need somebody to help with an IND, you know, investigational new drug application. You're the director of this Drug Discovery Alliance. Surely you know about INDs. Why don't you come help? Well, I actually did not know anything about INDs, but you know, as many of us, you just like, well, I'll figure it out. And that's when you do your first one. You kind of have some hits and misses. You learn a lot, and then before you know it, you've done tens of them, and then you become kind of the single-eyed is king in the land of the blind, something like that. So you learn more than anybody else knows, and you become really a valuable resource on campus to help investigators put together IND applications. And this was mostly for repurposing approaches, but actually also some gene therapy products. So in all of that, I became the co-director of this IND and IDE support program. And around the same time, somebody said, hey, we need somebody to do quality assurance for a vector production facility that was on campus. It was a phase 1 manufacturing facility that made adenoviruses and also some other types of vectors. They're like, hey, didn't you used to work in a virus lab? Don't you know adenovirus? Plus, you know, this regulatory piece because you help write INDs. Surely you can do quality assurance. Again, one of those things like, well, I know what the acronym stands for, but you know, I don't know really how to do that, but I'll figure it out. And it was really a wonderful opportunity. I was doing it one morning a week, where I would go to this vector production facility, review batch records. I really learned a lot about putting together the CMC section, chemistry, manufacturing, and control of adenovirus-based INDs. So it was, again, an expansion of a skill set that just happened to be, you know, put in front of me because of people knowing what I did and what my background was. Around 2012, 13 or so, because I was leading this drug discovery alliance, in our group, we saw an opportunity that it was a request for proposals for U19 applications at the NIH, at NIAID, and they were looking for centers that were going to do antiviral research. So we ended up putting together a U19, which is a massive grant, about $40 million for 5 years, where we pulled together different universities all over the country. We had Gilead Sciences as a pharmaceutical partner in this, really focusing on antiviral drug discovery and development, and a couple of different classes of viruses including actually coronavirus. So in this program, a group combined UNC and Vanderbilt were one of the first laboratories that were testing the Gilead compound remdesivir against coronaviruses. So it's really cool then years later during the pandemic that you see that come to fruition. Like, hey, I was part of that initial experiment, and having the administrative support to organize all this, the transfer of materials, making sure contracts are in place. So that was a lot of fun. So if we go to the next slide, around 2019 or so, I had this feeling like, okay, I kind of stopped learning. I really liked my roles. So the IND support, the Alabama Drug Discovery Alliance, this big U19 grant. But I felt after a couple of years, it became a little bit routine. And as scientists, we want to be stimulated, right? And there's always this, niggling, like, I wonder what a commercial sector is like. Sometimes I've felt a little frustrated, but sometimes the diffuse and sometimes slow pace of academia, again, it depends a lot from lab to lab, but sometimes like, I wish we would just have a little bit more resources and go a little bit faster. So because I thought, okay, I can't herd cats, there was a position open as a senior project manager at Evonik, which is a global chemistry specialty company out of Germany, but they have a location in Birmingham. I said, let me give it a go. So I left my professorship behind, which people thought I was a little bit nuts. But if you don't get stimulated and you need to make your own choices. So I joined Evonik as a project manager. Missed the science too much, I would say. As a project manager, you're really, I learned a lot about acronyms for sure, and we did a lot of manufacturing of drug products in the facility. So, but the direct use of my scientific knowledge was really not important in that role. Luckily, they had a position open in strategic marketing, so I joined initially as a senior manager and was promoted to director to really use my scientific background as well as the business acumen to talk to potential clients, to figure out, okay, with the technologies that we have within Evonik, how can we market ourselves, position ourselves in the marketplace to be a differentiator from our competitors? What new technologies do we may want to bring in-house? So I was talking with academic professors actually, or small companies, to look at what they had to see if that was maybe a acquisition target for us. So I learned a lot, but I really missed the early stage drug discovery. At a company like that, a CDMO, we're looking at really the manufacturing piece of drugs. That's really in the late end of getting something to the clinic. And I really missed that early basic biology link a little bit as well. So then fortunately, I saw the advertisement for the executive director role for the Translational Therapeutics Accelerator, or TREXA as we call it, within the Critical Path Institute. And really so far, I'm loving it. So to summarize, some of the takeaways are here is really try to look for growth and learning opportunities. And you see that echoed in all the presentations you've seen so far. And personal connections really helped me during my UAB career. So really was forged by informal networking and engagement, going to lunch and learns on campus, walking the halls, and just you're always willing to learn about somebody, what they're doing, maybe who they are as a person. And those connections kind of really come to fruition years later, maybe. The official job postings actually prompted my last few career moves. So both the advertisement for the Evonik role, and then it was actually on LinkedIn, the executive director role at C-Path I applied for. And so I do want to encourage you too, if some of you have heard, well, you can only find a job through networking. Networking certainly helps. But I also want to give you some encouragement that both times I actually applied for a job that was posted and I actually got the position. So they're not a lost cause. And then the final point here is maybe a bit of an obvious one, but it's not obvious enough, I think, when you think about it. I don't wanted to point it out. I've always been known to be a really organized person and nice person too, I would hope. And it really helps with a great reputation. And it's really less common than you think. I've counseled a lot of students and postdocs during all my career opportunities. And they always think, well, how can I stand out? And actually, just the fact that you get your stuff done on time, you respond to emails timely, you would think that would be the basic requirement. And then you need to be really awesome after that. Well, actually, just being that organized and dependable already gives you a leg up compared to the majority of your peers, believe me. So don't neglect that part of the process. So then let me talk a little bit about TREXA. I won't belabor this too much, but want to start on the left side of the slide, which there's a problem where we want to transition projects from academia to industry. This is called the Valley of Death. And there's multifactorial reasons for that, but some of them are that there's a lack of understanding at times. Again, it depends from professor to professor, but what actually do you need as far as data so that it's of interest to a pharmaceutical company to then license it and take it all the way forward to a patient. The other aspect is the regulatory aspects of drug development. And then the last bullet point that's mentioned here is that sometimes academic studies lack reproducibility. It's a bit of there's different views on how often it is a problem, but it's enough of a problem that sometimes it gives pharmaceutical companies a little bit pause if nobody else, just but your group, has shown something. So then what's the solution? Well, what we want to do is provide both funding and expertise, and that expertise comes in the shape of regulatory guidance, drawing also on the information and knowledge of all my colleagues here, and then assist also in study design and implementation. Really, what experiments do you need to do to get to the clinic in a straight line as possible? We know there's going to be some detours, but let's not, follow all the squirrels that we see on our path. And then we want to also coordinate involvement with contract research organizations, or CROs, to, for example, repeat the experiment that's done in the academic lab, just in a neutral third party. And that way, when you go to pharmaceutical companies that are like, hey, we have this great asset, we have this drug that's shown this and this, results in, for example, animal models. And look, it's not just us who've shown it, but look also at this data package of this other group that's shown it. So then on the right, I wanted to point out a couple of unique aspects of our accelerator. So we are independent and not for profit. We're not affiliated with any university. We can support projects all over the world. And we're really this neutral facilitator that Kristen talked about earlier. We're really, the North Star is to be neutral, and we don't have any claims on intellectual property that you're developing. And we really want to leverage C-Path's regulatory knowledge and relationships to bring the best support possible to the projects that we fund, and also help with some project management and streamline planning and execution. So when you look at the graph on the bottom, if you want to go back just for a second, I wanted to point out what place in the drug discovery pipeline we play. So we really want to fund projects in lead optimization and IND enabling studies. So that means we are not funding basic biology. We're not funding high throughput screens. We're also not funding clinical trials, but everything in between is kind of the hard part. That's really where we want to support. So then the next slide shows again the structure of C-Path, and I just put it up because I want to point out the concentration areas at the bottom. You can look at those different therapeutic areas. This is the initial focus of Trexa's support in those particular therapeutic areas, as well as looking at projects that use small molecules. So at this point in time, we're not funding any biologicals. So you want to go to the next slide, just really briefly tell you how much funding we will give out. We have 3 different types of applications called stage 1, 2, and 3, and they're funded at $250,000 for 1 year, $500,000 or $1 million. And it depends on the exact stage of your project where it would fit in. And if you're interested, feel free to reach out to us and we can kind of, debate with you what the best application is for your particular project. So then the next slide, just wanted to tie it all together and let you know how Trexa synergizes with C-Path's project-based consortia that you've heard a couple of. So the consortia, for example, the one that Diane leads, the consortium, the Critical Path for Parkinson's, we're really focusing on bringing together all these parties and put together drug development tools. Whereas we're at Trexa really focused directly with monetary support on drug discovery and development, but still we have all these great networks of people that we can interact with, subject matter experts in academia, in industry, in the regulatory agencies. So we can really help put together the right expertise around the project that we fund to get the right eyeballs on it and get advice to get to the clinic as quickly as possible. So we really want to apply the regulatory expertise also in Hong's group within C-Path, as well as the project planning and management skills to get something to the patient as quickly as possible. And I did want to make a quick plug for our open call for proposals. Just last week, we released a request for proposals for these different types of projects. The deadline is April 17. So we're looking for pre-proposals at this point in time, which is pretty high level information. So please go to our website and you can find a lot of information there on the eligibility criteria, et cetera, et cetera. So then let's see what's here. We are ready for a panel discussion. So Kristen, I'm gonna give it back to you, and then I think we're all gonna come on camera, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I want to just remind everybody that if they have any questions that they'd like to ask any of the panelists, go ahead and just put that in the Q&A section of the webinar. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and get us started. And actually, Hong, I have a question for you. You know, what's the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome to get to, you know, really where you are today?
One of the things that come to mind is self-confidence in me. My self-confidence to get through a PhD program, to do the research, to kind of pretend that I know what I'm doing in the laboratory and that it's okay to ask for help. That's one of the biggest things, is have confidence in my skills and knowing when I can reach out to help and not be embarrassed that I'm reaching out to help. And especially important when I was at the FDA, because there's so many regulatory policies and guidances, not one person is going to be able to understand. So I keep going back to my senior reviewers who've been there longer than me and ones who have seen the changes, why something was changed. So then they can give me that context, but definitely getting myself out of my way. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. And, you know, it just for those that are on the line, we, you know, as we were preparing for this, one of the just brief discussions that we had was just the idea that, you know, we each had a general feeling at some point in our careers of imposter syndrome, in that, you know, it can be particularly challenging to, you know, feel like we've got the skills and the aptitude to do what it is that we're doing. And so, you know, I think, my hope is that as, you know, as the world continues to evolve and we have more sessions like this, that, you know, hopefully we're continuing to foster an environment where, you know, where everybody, you know, feels like they've got the skills and they're capable to be successful. But, you know, Ramona, a question for you. What, you know, you obviously had a very diverse journey leading to C-Path. What is, at this point, what's one piece of advice that you might have given your younger self?
So I'm gonna answer you with some pieces of advice that you think I would have given myself, but I didn't necessarily need. You know, one might be to enjoy the ride, right? You might think, looking back, that that I was worried about where I was going with my career and felt like I was drifting, but I never did. Unfortunately, I always felt like this is the best thing for me right now, and I didn't worry so much about where I would be in 20 years, right? And so. Not feeling like, so I guess the advice then would be like, don't feel like you have to have everything planned out, you know, just, you do need to have plans. You need to think long-term, that's fine. But don't stress about it too much. Another piece of advice that might be like, you know, if I had persevered more in the face of the blatant sexism that I encountered when I was a teenager in our late 20s, maybe I would have had a more straightforward path to success. But I have no regrets about the deviations that I took. And, you know, when you're 20, so that maybe the advice is when you're 20, go have some fun and don't worry about, about getting to where you need to be, because you'll be old before you know it. Enjoy doing things with your body while it's still young and flexible, you know, like traveling and staying out late and all that stuff. Right. But, you know, but again, don't ignore life's responsibilities. But I guess the one piece of advice that I would give myself is something that I had done differently, was to become more financially savvy at a young age. So I knew enough that I needed to save money. And in my 20s, I made a good living and I saved a lot of money. I didn't know that my husband was going to get schizophrenia and throw me out of the house. And so I didn't plan financially for that hardship in my life. And I've seen it happen to women over and over again. So as young women, we need to plan for our financial independence. I've had to spend the last 20 years recovering financially from being a single parent in my 30s and 40s. Yeah. And I've recovered now, thankfully, but it took a lot of, I'm not in as good a position as most people my age who have a similar career status. So plan for hardships in life and learn to manage your own finances, regardless of what a wonderful relationship you're in, because you never know what will happen.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that is tremendous advice. And I can tell you, as the mom of a current 18-year-old female, that we've actually had these conversations. You know, if this is her first experience kind of adulting, and, you know, the amount of stress that she has, around like needing to create a budget, and she came up with that on her own, the fact that she needed to do that. And, you know, my husband and I are both like, try not to be too excited, try not to be too excited. I'm actually thinking about that. But it's incredibly, it's like, all right, I appreciate the fact that that's something that's, you know, on her mind, and hopefully we just continue to build that level of sufficient self-sufficiency, right? In others. So
Exactly.
Micah, there actually is a question in the Q&A for you, and it is related to the Trexa program. And really, is there any support to fill out the proposals for this next round of RFPs?
Yeah, I'm glad it was asked. So yes, the answer is yes. Because in one of my overview slides, I said, you know, the problem with the valley of death is that people don't really know what they need to do. Well, then it's not really fair to ask, so tell me what you want to do. So we do have the pre-proposal is, I think, fairly basic to fill out. So go to the website, and you know, you can also reach out to us as well. There's in the Trexa program, there's a link to funding and application instructions. There's a guidance document there, so you can look at that. It explains, you know, what's eligible, what's not, what are the review criteria. And then it's a form that you fill out actually online, and it has specific information, like you have 50 words to tell us about your target, or is there genetic information available? So it's a very logical, hopefully directed question, so that you can fill it out, you know, without having to think about NIH style proposals. But then we are available for consultations. So within the Trexa team, we just hired a new director of drug discovery and development. His name is Mark Drew. He's a medicinal chemist by training, so he can help with some of the, you know, chemistry, drug discovery and development questions. I myself have experience, of course, in academic drug discovery support role. So we are here to help. You can reach out to us via our email address at trexa@c-path.edu. So that's TRXA@c-path.org. Sorry, I was in my university ORG. So reach out to us, and we can schedule a 30-minute call. You can also just send us an email like, hey, I have this particular question. So please reach out to us. We are here to help and support you, and that's exactly, you know, what we love to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Micah. And if you have, Sheila, I know you asked a question. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out directly to Micah and the team. There's another question here, and thank you all for submitting. You know, is there any more advice you would want to add? I've been working in pharma for over 30 years, finding that I'm still being challenged to develop skills while I am a subject matter expert. I'm in a new position, new company. It can feel uncomfortably challenged on the job while still being seen as the experts. And so advice on how to manage the uncomfortable. This is a really interesting question. You know, Diane, maybe I'll kick it over to you to see how you might answer this as an experienced scientific and experienced leader. I certainly have some thoughts on this as well. So, but Diane? Thanks
for the question, and very relevant. You know, having spent, more than 25 years in 3 big companies, I empathize with that same feeling. Probably the hardest thing for me in my career was going through those big mergers. When I left Pfizer, we had gone through 3 major mergers. Every time you merge or work with a different group, these are very big companies with different ways of thinking, different mindsets, and very much questioning what role you can have, right? Do you have a say? Do they even ask you what you think? And one of my favorite things when I was in industry of all 3 companies I was at was to be a mentor to young women, to give them the confidence that yes, you do have a say. Just make sure that you're heard, right? And even if that means finding a friend or someone that'll listen to you, that will be your voice, right? Up the line, right? Because everyone should have a say, and how these companies work, you have an incredible ability to shape what success looks like and make things happen by being heard and not sitting back or, you know, complaining that, oh, this is too big and I can't deal with it. You have to have the confidence that you can definitely make change happen, even especially in times of change, because they're so busy about change that they're waiting for people to take charge. That's my advice.
Yep. I would say from my experience as well, and thank you for that, Diane. You know, when I read this question, I think about the situation where you don't want to lose the confidence of others in you by you know, as the subject matter expert, by recognizing or voicing that, you know, you still have areas in which, you know, you yourself need to grow. I feel like you know, I've had the luxury of always being in environments where I have felt that I can simply communicate that. That, you know, I'm one that firmly believes that if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I need to find a new room, because, you know, I like having, you know, creating, collaborating to kind of collectively bring forward something of value. And I realize that's very much, you know, my personal experience, but I feel like I've been very lucky in that. I also, you know, find my recommendation or suggestion is just to continue to find your people, continue to find people in which, if you don't feel like you have an open forum to kind of operate in that way, at least you have you know, one or two individuals that you trust to be a sounding board and that will help guide and continue to mentor you, you know, regardless of, you know, your tenure in your career, because I think it's a lot of times it's just important that we get out of our own heads and we you know, we put voice to things because that can certainly help. So you know, that's one of the ways in which I kind of manage the uncomfortable, is just by talking with others, because it certainly helps me to, you know, as I articulate where I might be seeing challenges or what I might be feeling, it actually helps me in helping to create my own kind of solutions to what I'm thinking about. So that's just one piece of advice I have.
Kristen, I just wanted to add on to that is part of what I try to do for myself is volunteer in other organizations, and I find mentors so that I can talk to them about the uncomfortableness of where I may be at. And it was especially helpful when I was at the FDA, for as big as it was, because you never know who's talking to who. So I found my mentors and channels of support outside.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, Helen. We have one question. Oh, let's see. Ramona, do you actually want to maybe address the question in the Q&A around diversity efforts at C-Path?
Sure, as long as I can unmute myself. I've been so busy typing the answer saying I didn't answer it yet, though, that I haven't thought of an answer. but I can certainly start to address that. So, you know, diversity is something that, as a nonprofit, I mean, hopefully for-profit companies feel the same way. It's important everywhere right now. And I think, and we are very lucky to have, as you can see here, a large percentage of women in leadership positions in C-Path. But there's obviously still a lot of areas where we can do better for diversity. So within my team in particular, I'm a data science team. I find it extremely difficult to hire, to get applications from people who are not white men, because it's a technical position. I'm looking for people with software development experience, with technical training, and that's who tends to be in those fields. What I've tried to do is, you know, even though, you know, Micah's right. Yes, you can get jobs through applying for them, but I find it harder to recruit people by simply putting an ad out there. So I make a lot of efforts to network as much as possible and get the word out into different organizations where I feel that there may be people who could apply for this job, and just constantly make it clear that. Well, let me pause for a second. I have read some research that shows that when there's a job description, women will apply for the job if they meet something like 90% of the criteria. Men will apply when they meet 50% of the criteria. So if I post a job ad with a lot of technical criteria, I always include in the job description, if you're the right person and don't meet all these criteria, apply anyway. I'm willing to train. I'm looking for the person with the right mindset, with the right underlying skills. I don't care if you have direct experience in Python programming. are you capable of learning Python programming? Can you bring a unique perspective to my team? So as leaders, it's really crucial for us to constantly push that message out there and try really hard with hiring to recruit diverse talent, but it's not easy at all.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
a very sorry, eloquent answer. Maybe someone else would like to chime in as well.
No, I think, and I've heard that same, statistic, Ramona, and actually speaks to part of what Han was mentioning in her own, in her own kind of path, right? Her biggest challenge is having the confidence in ourselves to kind of put ourselves out there. We are not the best at being our own advocate.
Yep.
And so I think having the confidence to do that and knowing that if you don't give it a shot, then you're not going to be successful. And so just continuing to be able to advocate, be able to voice and be able to stand behind your strengths and know that there are hiring managers that are looking exactly for that. And so lean into that and really continue to give it a shot.
I think the other thing that I've noticed that C-Path does really well, Kristen, is that the organization cares a lot about professional development and will provide resources for its employees who have professional development experiences. And one good way, if we complain that there's not enough people in the pool for the kinds of positions, one good way to get them is to train them internally, to look in your own staff, to look at people across, whether they're in your department or someone else's, and look at them and say, okay, with some training, would this person be appropriate for that role? And can I support their growth into that if they're interested in it?
Great. Thanks, Ramona. I will say that one of the other, as far as just kind of, general basics, so C-Path does have, a group of employees that help to further, dive into different initiatives that we may take on to further expand our diversity, equity, and inclusion within our organization. I think one of the, I would say tenets of C-Path in that, we are an organization that is looking to drive innovation. And so we recognize that, in order to be innovative, you need to have diversity of thought. It's just it's a barrier to entry. So if we don't have diverse voices speaking to what it is that we're trying to create and how we're trying to meet the unmet needs for patients, then we're doing our community a disservice. So as an organization, we're not really able to fulfill upon our mission. So inherent in what we do is really being able to expand and have diversity of thought to create that innovation. There are just a couple of other additional questions that I want to turn to in the chat, and Hong, one is directed specifically to you. How do you go about selecting an organization to volunteer for? What do you look for?
So for the organization, it stems back to where I was. It all started with postdocing, and at that time, I wanted to know more about what other universities were doing in postdoc. And at that time in 2003, the National Postdoc Association was just forming. So it's like, I wanted to get my feet in, but not totally commit. So I kind of went into it with a friend, a colleague, and he kind of introduced me to everyone else, and then just kind of eased my way into volunteering at the committee level first. And that was the same thing I did with AWIS San Diego, Association for Women in Science. So I stuck with the science because that's where I was in postdoc, but then moving on in terms of workplace enhancement, it was internal to our group at FDA. And I felt like through my work in San Diego at the postdoc training office, I was a good event planner, and thinking that workplace enhancement would be event planning. I can do that. I can figure out catering. I can figure out flyers to advertise the event. I've done it before. It may not be polished, but I've done it before. And the volunteering gives me that opportunity to practice in a safe environment before I actually really have to do it for the job. I mean, to think if I actually have to do those event flyers for real, and then Women of Cedar, FDA Alumni Association. It's just getting my foot in because I wanted to be able to get to my next step. So I know my core group at the job, what they can help me with and what they cannot. But if I needed more, I seek elsewhere. So that's how I figure out what organization I decide to follow and volunteer with.
Great. Thanks, Hong.
Mhm.
All right, well, we actually have a couple of additional questions, but they're all related to career paths at C-Path, so and joining the team. So this last slide, this was updated as of this morning, I believe. So these are the current listing of open positions that we have within the organization. On the bottom right-hand corner there, you see the web address for our employment page. So if you have any interest in continuing to learn more about C-Path, please reach out. Really encourage everybody to reach out on LinkedIn as well. Each one of us are on LinkedIn and pretty active at posting. Would love to be able to connect with you that way. We also have on our website under our people page, if you want to go and learn a little bit more about the our colleagues here at C-Path, you can check that out, and you can directly connect with each of us on LinkedIn through that webpage. So with that, Michelle, I'm going to kick it over to you to maybe offer some closing thoughts, make sure I didn't miss anything.
No, you know what, this was such a wonderful way to spend time together, right? Thank you everyone for sharing, such personal insights into your journeys and your candor, right? That's what we need to do to support each other. We did have questions about these slides being available. We have recorded the event, and we can post all of this we will post it to the website, our website, in the coming days. So I just round of applause to everyone, and a big thank you to all our participants and for engaging with your great questions as well.
Great.
So,
Thank you all so much.
thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.